There was a princess who became a protector, a daughter who chose her husband over her father, a wife who risked her life for the man she loved. But when he returned years later wearing a crown, she was no longer his beloved. She was just a piece in a game of power. Her name was Michal, daughter of King Saul, first wife of David. Michal was not a villain seeking revenge. She was not a hero without flaws. She was a woman caught between love and power, between sacrifice and abandonment, between hope and devastating loss. She defied a king to save David's life. She lowered him out a window while assassins surrounded their home. She lied to soldiers to protect him. She risked execution for love. But David never came back for her. She was given to another man, forgotten. And when David finally demanded her return, it wasn't because he loved her. It was because he needed her. And there's something hidden in Michal's story that will completely change how you understand the cost of bitterness. Something about one confrontation with David that sealed her fate forever. A consequence recorded in Scripture that carries a warning for every person who's ever been wounded. So stay with me, because the story of the woman who saved a king and lost everything begins now. This is about more than ancient history. This is about the choice between worship and wounds. And by the end, you'll understand why Michal's story matters for your life today. Because what happened to Michal after she criticized David's worship reveals something most people miss about the nature of bitterness. The Bible doesn't hide difficult truths. It records them with brutal honesty. And Michal's ending teaches us that some choices cost us everything we were meant to become. This isn't just her story. This could be yours. To understand Michal, we need to go back to the palace of King Saul, to a moment when David was nothing more than a shepherd boy who had killed a giant. Imagine the scene. The royal palace rising against the evening sky, its stone walls catching the last golden rays of sunlight. Bronze torches beginning to flicker along the corridors, casting dancing shadows on walls adorned with shields and spears from countless battles. The sound of celebration echoing through the courtyards and spilling into the crowded streets beyond the palace walls. Women's voices filling the air with a dangerous comparison, a song that would change the course of history. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. The air was electric with excitement and underlying tension. The smell of roasted lamb and fresh bread drifting from the celebration feast in the great hall. The clinking of wine cups raised in endless toasts. The laughter of soldiers recounting the battle, exaggerating their own bravery. Guards standing at attention along the palace walls, their bronze armor gleaming in the torchlight. And standing at a window overlooking it all was Michal, King Saul's daughter, watching as the young warrior walked through the palace gates. Michal was royalty. She had everything a woman of her time could want: security, status, wealth, a future carefully planned by her father the king. She wore fine linen robes dyed in royal purple. She had servants attending to her every need. She lived in the most powerful family in all of Israel, but everything was about to change. The Bible records something extraordinary in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 20. It doesn't describe a mutual romance. It doesn't say they both fell in love. It states plainly, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. This is rare language in Scripture. Her feelings are declared openly, without hesitation, without reciprocation mentioned. She was a princess. He was a commoner who had defeated Goliath with a sling and a stone. She had position. He had only courage and God's favor. But her heart made its choice, and when King Saul discovered his daughter's affection, he didn't see a beautiful union waiting to happen. He saw an opportunity for murder disguised as marriage, because Saul's heart had turned poisonous with jealousy. Every song praising David felt like a dagger to his pride. God's presence had departed from Saul, but remained powerfully with this shepherd boy, and Saul couldn't tolerate it. So he devised a trap. He offered Michal's hand in marriage to David, but demanded an unusual bride price, not silver or gold or land, but 100 Philistine foreskins. It was a death sentence wrapped in royal generosity. Saul calculated that David would die attempting such an impossible, dangerous mission. The Philistines were Israel's most feared enemies, trained warriors with superior weapons and fortified cities. Entering their territory to kill 100 of them was suicide. But Saul underestimated David, and he underestimated God's protection over the young warrior. David didn't die. He returned victorious with 200 foreskins, exactly double what Saul had demanded. The king's scheme had failed completely. He was forced to honor his word. Michal became David's wife, but the marriage brought no peace. It brought only escalating danger. Scripture records that when Saul realized God was truly with David and that Michal genuinely loved him, the king's fear transformed into murderous obsession. He tried to kill David with a spear. Twice, he sent him on dangerous military missions. Nothing worked. And then the inevitable order was issued, kill David before sunrise. And in that moment, Michal had to choose loyalty to her father, the king, or love for her husband, the warrior. Obedience to royal authority or protection of the man her heart had chosen. What she did next would save David's life, but it would also set in motion a chain of events that would eventually break her. Because love, no matter how brave, no matter how sacrificial, isn't always enough. The palace felt different that night. The celebration had ended hours ago. Darkness had settled over Jerusalem like a heavy blanket. And somewhere in that darkness, Saul's most trusted soldiers were receiving their orders in hushed whispers. Find David's house, surround every exit, watch through the night, at first light kill him. No exceptions, no mercy, no second chances. The young warrior who had defeated Goliath, who had won every battle, who carried God's favor like a banner, would not see another sunrise. Unless someone intervened, unless someone with access to royal information discovered the plot and had the courage to act on it. Michal did something that few women in that era would have dared. She chose her husband over her father. She chose love over power. She chose action over the safety of silence. The Bible records it clearly in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him and kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, saying, "If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. But the biblical text, as always, doesn't capture the full emotional weight of that moment. Picture it with me, in vivid detail. Night has fallen over their home. Outside in the darkness, the sounds of boots on stone, the subtle clink of weapons being adjusted, shadows moving carefully in the dim torchlight from the street. Saul's assassins taking their positions, surrounding every exit with military precision. The orders are crystal clear. No one leaves this house alive. At dawn, David dies. Inside the house, Michal has discovered the plot through her connections in the palace. Her heart is racing, pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. Her mind is calculating rapidly, running through options, discarding impossible plans. She knows exactly what happens to anyone who defies King Saul's direct orders. She's seen her father's uncontrollable rage up close. She's witnessed what he does to those who betray him. She knows the cost, but she also knows she has only hours to save the man she loves. Hours before the sun rises and the order is carried out. She moves quickly, urgently, with the kind of decisive action that comes only in moments of absolute crisis. She finds rope, testing its strength with trembling hands. She chooses a window that faces away from most of the guards, calculating angles and sight lines. She tells David the brutal truth without softening it. "They're coming to kill you. If you stay here, you die. There's no other option." And then she lowers him into the darkness, hand over hand, the rough rope burning her palms. her breath coming shallow and quick, her eyes constantly watching the shadows below for any movement, any sign they've been discovered. What would you do in that situation? Would you defy your own father, your king, to protect someone you love? Would you risk your position, your safety, your very life for one person? Michal did exactly that, without hesitation, without calculating the cost to herself. But she wasn't finished. The hardest part was still ahead. After David fled into the darkness and disappeared, Michal had to buy him time. Every minute mattered. Every hour of delay meant David could get farther away, could find safety, could survive. So she took a household idol, positioned it carefully in their bed, covered it with blankets to create the shape of a sleeping body, and placed goat hair near the pillow to simulate David's head on the pillow. When Saul's soldiers arrived at first light, pounding on the door with urgent fists, she met them with a perfectly composed lie. David is sick with fever. He cannot be moved. You'll have to wait. She bought precious hours. She deceived the king's men to their faces. She risked her father's wrath, knowing full well what could happen to her. She risked everything. Have you ever been in a position where you had to choose between two people you love? Where there was no right answer, only impossible choices? That's exactly how Michal felt, and she chose David. But here's what Scripture doesn't record. There's no verse saying David came back for Michal. There's no mention of him sending word, making arrangements to bring her to safety, or fighting to keep his marriage intact. David escaped into the wilderness. David survived to fight another day. David built his army and his future, and Michal was left behind to face the consequences completely alone. When Saul confronted her with cold fury, demanding to know why she had helped his enemy escape, Michal lied again to protect herself. She claimed David had threatened her life, forcing her to help him. It was pure survival instinct. But the damage was done. The trust was shattered. The months turned into long, silent years. David lived in caves, hiding in the wilderness, gathering outlaws and desperate men to his side, slowly building an army. And during those years of exile and waiting, David married other women. Ahinoam of Jezreel, Abigail, the wise widow of Nabal, 2 new wives while Michal was still legally his bride, still waiting in her father's palace, still hoping against hope that he might return for her, still believing that love would win in the end. Have you ever poured absolutely everything you had into someone, only to watch them build their entire life without you in it? That's exactly how Michal must have felt as the years dragged on. Before we continue, if this story is stirring something deep inside you, if you're beginning to see yourself in Michal's pain, in her abandonment, in the wounds that never healed, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will reveal something powerful about how unhealed wounds poison our ability to worship. It will challenge you to choose differently than Michal chose. It will transform how you understand the devastating cost of bitterness. And you'll want more stories like this. Stories of real biblical characters who faced impossible choices. Stories of faith and failure walking side by side. Stories of redemption and warning that speak directly to your life today. And then came an even deeper betrayal that would shatter what remained of Michal's heart. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 44 records it with brutal simplicity. But Saul gave his daughter Michal, David's wife, to another man, Palti, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Michal wasn't consulted about this decision. She wasn't asked for her opinion or her consent. She had no voice, no choice, no power. She was simply transferred from one man to another, like property being reassigned, like a political asset being moved on a game board. For years, Michal lived with Palti. The Bible remains silent about that time, offering no details about her thoughts or feelings. But we know one crucial detail because of what happens later. When David eventually demanded her return, 2 Samuel chapter 3 records that Palti followed her, weeping openly, all the way to Bahurim until he was ordered to turn back. Palti loved Michal. He didn't want to lose her. He had built a life with her. David had become king of Judah. He was consolidating power, negotiating with tribes, positioning himself to unite all Israel under his rule, and to legitimize his claim to Saul's throne. He needed Saul's daughter back. Not because he loved her, not because he missed her, but because she was strategically valuable. The transaction was cold and political. David sent messengers demanding, "Give me back my wife Michal." And she was returned to him like reclaimed property, torn from a man who loved her, and delivered to a man who needed her. When Michal arrived at David's palace, she found a very different man than the warrior she had saved. He now had multiple wives. He had power and wealth and an entire kingdom to manage. And she was just one wife among many. No longer special, no longer essential, just present. And then came the day that would seal Michal's fate forever. David had ordered the Ark of the Covenant brought to Jerusalem. This was one of the most sacred moments in Israel's entire history. The Ark represented God's manifest presence among his people, and King David stood at the very center of the celebration. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 14 describes what happened. David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a linen ephod. Picture the scene in vivid cinematic detail. The streets of Jerusalem packed with thousands upon thousands of celebrating Israelites. The ark being carried slowly on poles by Levites, moving through the crowd like a ship through waves. The sound overwhelming. Trumpets blaring golden notes into the sky, cymbals crashing with metallic thunder, tambourines shaking rhythmically, the roar of voices raised in praise. David in the middle of it all, stripped of his royal robes, wearing only a simple linen garment, his body leaping, spinning, arms raised toward heaven, face radiant with joy, completely abandoned to worship, unconcerned with dignity or appearances or what anyone thought. The people celebrating with him, caught up in the moment, experiencing revival, breakthrough, the return of God's presence to Jerusalem. But in a palace window overlooking the entire procession stood Michal, daughter of Saul, watching. And what happened in her heart at that moment is recorded with devastating clarity. Verse 16, when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. Can you imagine the years of accumulated pain concentrated in that single moment? Can you picture what was going through her mind as she watched from that window? She looked at David dancing, the man she had loved with her whole heart, the man she had saved from certain death, the man who had abandoned her without a second thought, the man who had married other women while she waited, the man who had demanded her return, not from love, but from cold political calculation, the man who now had multiple wives while she lived, forgotten in his palace. And she felt nothing but contempt, pure, active contempt. When David returned home that evening, overflowing with joy, Michal was waiting. Her words dripped with sarcasm. How the king of Israel has honored himself today, exposing himself like some vulgar fool, shamelessly exposes himself. David's response came immediately and sharply. It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, but by these slave girls you mentioned, I will be held in honor. That confrontation ended their relationship completely, and the Bible records the consequence in a single devastating verse. And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. Michal wasn't just a scorned wife in an ancient drama. She was a living picture of what happens when we allow human disappointment to eclipse divine presence. God could have chosen to teach this lesson through someone more sympathetic, someone whose wounds were less justified. But he chose Michal, whose pain was real and legitimate. Why? Because God doesn't measure our worth by who loves or rejects us here on earth. He measures our worth by his unchanging love for us, and he calls us to worship him regardless of our wounds. So what do we learn from Michal? First, don't let your wounds define your worship. Michal had legitimate reasons to be bitter, but when the moment came to worship, her pain spoke louder than God's presence. Second, humility before God matters more than preserving your pride. David was willing to appear undignified. He worshipped without concern for appearances. Finally, bitterness leads to barrenness. Michal bore no children. When you cling to bitterness, you become spiritually unfruitful. If Michal's story has touched your heart today, I want you to do 3 things. First, leave a comment below and write, "I choose worship over my wounds." Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more transformative biblical stories. Third, share this video with someone carrying bitterness who needs to know their wounds don't have to define their worship. Michal started as a princess who risked everything for love. She ended barren, bitter, and silent. The difference? Her choice in one crucial moment. Today, God is asking you, will you let go of what's killing you and worship me anyway? The answer is you. Choose worship, choose life, choose God over your wounds. May the story of Michal remind you today that bitterness leads to barrenness, but worship leads to abundant life. God bless you deeply. Until the next story.